In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos pregame walkthrough brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB, and we are getting you set for the rematch. Hamilton at Toronto. This, JB, this one, it feels so rushed on this super short week. Same opponent. I'm excited about it because, like the players have been saying all week, they can't wait to get back to it. I'm excited to see what that looks like. Heading into Friday's game, are you like, duck and cover, or are you feeling confident going into this week?
I wouldn't say I feel confident. I think that there is a path to winning at home. I think that they feel good at home. We beat Winnipeg at home quite soundly. I think that the team can recapture some of that swag. I think what we'll find out is this a team that can come close to the edge and be physical and challenging and trash talking and get the job done? Or is this a team that talks a lot, but is not quite ready to compete with an upper echelon team? So I think it's a big night for the Argos.
I think this is a lot like the second Winnipeg game, and I think it's going to go very much the same way. I think the score is going to be a little bit closer, and we'll get to that when we go through predictions later on in this episode. But to me, it's the same thing. It's a home and home, and like I said from the beginning, it's really hard to beat the same team twice in 2 weeks, and I think the Tiger Cats are going to go through that. And I don't think the Tiger Cats are a noticeably better team than the Argonauts in terms of personnel. They looked much better last week. But Winnipeg looked much better in the first game of that series as well. And then Toronto looked by far to be the better team in the second game. I think we're going to see it look a little bit more like that. The back-to-back games, I can't stress enough how difficult it is to sweep a good team in back-to-back weeks in professional football. And the Argonauts are a good team. And so I think this isn't a game I'm worried about. Now, the part I'm worried about is the stakes are high. This isn't a game you want to lose, because if you lose this game, and now we're heading on the road to Saskatchewan, who may be coming off back-to-back losses based on what's happening with Saskatchewan and Winnipeg, that could be a bad scenario, and suddenly they're in a position where we're talking about must-win situations, and that's never something you want to get into midway through the season. So
I don't mind.
It is important.
I don't mind if they lose. I don't think, because I think initially when I looked at the first 8, I had them losing both. Before Hamilton's slow start. Hamilton was an elite team, and I didn't think that we were quite at that level yet. If we lose these 2, I think what it means is, that we're not, in the top 2 teams in the league. But that's okay. I mean, I don't think that that's where we are going to be. I think that we're going to be mid-tier. So I'm not actually that worried if they lose this game. I still think we can beat Montreal, we can beat Ottawa. We can beat BC. I feel good about the team. If we're not able to beat Hamilton, I think Hamilton very well may be the best team in the league.
There are so many injuries that this team has had to endure.
Right.
And most of them we haven't noticed too much, because a lot of them are on defense, and the defense has played out of their minds most of the time. Even last week, I thought the defense, and especially when I was rewatching that game, the defense played well. And people were all over the offensive line after that game. The defensive line was doing everything they were asked to do. They weren't sent after the quarterback. And you can really see that when you're looking for it. And on that rewatch, I'm just watching the TV coverage, and they're doing their job. They've been asked to sort of contain and close. And that's what they're doing. The linebackers are occasionally sent in there to get blitzes or to get sacks off blitzes. And they did. They got 3. And so I don't think you can really point to too much on defense. They did have that one bust that resulted in that long touchdown pass, but I don't think there's any business anyone has criticizing the defense, and yet they have lost man after man, from Shane Ray to Coney Ely to Drake Nevis, and Cordero Law, of course, the Robertson Daniel, losing Cresden Butler last week, and Arjun Cahoon. We've got so many men down on the Argos defense, and yet it hasn't really affected their play through the course of a game. Now, at some point, there's that, one extra weight is going to tip the scales entirely, and so I don't know how many more injuries they can endure, and hopefully it's not this Cresden Butler injury, because Cresden is going to be missing this game, but we'll have to see, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail when we get to injuries. So let's go through news and notes for this week, JB. News: Nick Arbuckle is starting this game. Now, to me, that shouldn't be news, but it was. That was not only a story that I saw on 3 Down, but it was something that was asked repeatedly in the press conference this week following practice. Coach Dinwiddie was asked, who are you starting at quarterback this week? And it blew my mind, because there was never a question to me as to who would be starting at quarterback this week. There's no way you'd be thinking about replacing Nick Arbuckle after last week's game. It wasn't his best game, but his first half was fine. And then his second half, you can't really gauge, because they were in desperation mode. They were down 3 scores. And so they had to press, and most quarterbacks aren't going to look good in that situation. He's still a very new quarterback, so that's not made for him, and that's not the kind of quarterback he is, who's just going to unload deep every play to try and get back into the game. In that regard, McLeod is a much better option for a team down by 3 scores. I'd much rather have McLeod in there, but there was never any doubt in my mind. Were you questioning Arbuckle at all as the starter?
No, I think we said at the time that he was clearly the starter, and I think that's the right choice. I think you have to ride with Arbuckle. It makes no sense to bounce back and forth. I mean, this is supposed to be a team that is building over the next couple of years. So I think you roll with Arbuckle for better or for worse. And because I would say the next time you take Arbuckle out is probably the last time. So I would say, barring a disaster, that Arbuckle will start every game this season.
Let's talk about the injuries from this week. And we knew the Argos were going to be pretty banged up this week, and there are some key pieces down, some that I wasn't even anticipating. And we'll start with the Tiger Cats first, because I didn't think they were going to be down anybody, but Brandon Banks has been ruled out as of just a few moments ago. So that changes Hamilton's... I was going to say that changes their offense. It's not like they've been going to Banks a ton this year. He hasn't had that huge breakout game that everyone is waiting for, but it does really occupy the defense. And on that rewatch from the game, I did notice how much attention they were paying to Banks, except on that one long touchdown play to Tim White, where Banks was also wide open for a touchdown. Other than that, he was pretty locked down, and they were certainly focused in on him, right down to that Tresden Deku hit in the end zone to knock that ball free. They knew where he was at all times. He still got himself open, but they were paying a lot of attention to him. Now, this may be one of those situations where I don't know, and I don't want to say this, but there are times when you take out a player like Banks, it actually helps the offense. This is not a long-term thing. But sometimes you see that happen where the defense suddenly doesn't know exactly how they're game planning. They don't really know the tendencies now, because it changes up what Hamilton is going to do, and that may cause problems. Do you have any concerns about Banks being out, or to you is this just good news?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, look, injuries are a huge problem for the Argos. Butler is maybe a game-deciding injury. Banks being out is fantastic. I think it Hamilton's offense is not particularly scary, and it just became less scary. I think from an Argo perspective, it could make you take more risks with blitzes. You don't have to quite be as conscious about the jet sweeps. I think that's a big loss for Hamilton, even though he hasn't played at that level. I think that's a tremendous evener for the Argos.
To me, I think it invites you to send more heat.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see what you say in our OCDC segment coming up, because like when I look at it, I think, okay, great, because Banks is the one guy that I really didn't want to have to think about in zero. Whereas now, I'm not. I know Tim White had a big day, but I'm not really worried about White. I'm not really worried about many of their guys one on one. I think the Argos have the skill position guys to defend them. And maybe this is an opportunity to just send the house and see what Hamilton can do about that. But I'm curious to see what you have to say when we get to OCDC. In terms of the Argos injuries, there's some bad news. So Philip Blake has been ruled out, this time with a hamstring injury. And you just have to feel for Philip Blake. Every week, it's been a different thing. And he's yet to make it through a game where the game ends and he's still standing and still out there. It's at the end of every single game, it's Peter Nicastro playing center, Philip Blake on the sideline, and the Argos scrambling to fill in a gap. I guess the only positive here is that we have known, and Nicastro took all the snaps at center last week because Philip Blake was out due to COVID protocol, and he's taken all the snaps again this week at center. So he is getting that time. And they drafted Peter Nicastro to be a center. This is his position. Maybe Philip Blake being out this week is a good thing long-term, because it will really force Peter Nicastro to be that center they drafted him to be. Or maybe it shows the Argos that they have to go in another direction, or they have to make a move if it's clear that Nicastro is not, meant to be the guy. Hamstring injuries, we know they're bad. They're not as bad for offensive linemen as for receivers, DBs. It's a little bit of a different skill set in terms of what the demands of that muscle are, but it's still important. Offensive linemen need their legs, but this isn't something where I'm expecting Philip Blake to be out for months. That said, I think we need to see something from Peter Nicastro this week, and if we don't, I think the Argos maybe have to start thinking a little bit. You agree?
Well, he played really. I mean, look, he played really poorly on Labor Day. The offensive line as a unit looked like a group that hadn't practiced together. So I'm not gonna damn them after one poor game. But yeah, if they have a second game, you start to look at, well, look, if we have playoff goals and aspirations, you've got to have a line. You don't have to have great players on the line, but you can't have a hole, right? It's not like any other position. You can't hide a guy. So you have to have everybody's got to be adequate. So yeah, I do think you have to make a change or a trade, because you have to have 5 adequate guys. You can't have a turnstile.
The other 2 guys on offense that are out this week, Daniel Braverman, who's out with an ankle injury, and I think that is a huge loss. And Levi Noel, who's out with a hamstring injury, less impactful, but it becomes more impactful when you've got Braverman out, because with Braverman out, you're thinking, well, that's okay, because Levi Noel had an amazing camp. Here's his opportunity to shine, to go in there and be the guy. And he's out too. Now, fortunately, Ricky Collins Jr. is coming back. He's going to be active. He'll be starting. And it looks like they're going to put Dejan Brissett in Daniel Braverman's position in that slot, playing the number 2 to the field side, with Gittins Jr. Playing at the Z. But this is, again, a loss. The receiving core has already sustained injuries. You got Jawan Breskison, who the team was counting heavily on, who was already out, and now you add Braverman to that list. I'm a little bit worried about that. Chandler Worthy's been activated for the game, which I'm actually excited about. I do think that's a positive that may result from all of this, but he's more there to be a backup to Devaris Daniels than anything else. I don't know how many snaps he'll get. I hope a lot, but it's certainly going to put a lot of pressure on those young Canadian receivers, because that's what they've got, along with Ricky Collins Jr. and Eric Rogers and Devaris Daniels. But a lot of pressure may be put on Dejan Brissett and Curly Gittins Jr. But Gittins Jr. had a great game last week. Hopefully he can build off that. And I thought that Dejan Brissett looked really good in that second Winnipeg game. Hopefully with a week of practice in that one spot, They've known that Braverman was going to be out, so maybe he'll be okay as well. But I'm worried about the receiver position.
It is worrisome. I think Hamilton's secondary is the best in the league. We don't have elite speed in our wide receiver unit. So you need to scheme guys open because you're not going to win one-on-one battles against that secondary on a regular basis, and you're going to get a lot of contested catches. And I think you need to look at some ways of designing guys open. I think that's going to be crucial. I don't really put it on the receivers. I think that the plan is going to have to be trickier because we can't just line up and play cat. Our cats are better than your cats because they're not. So you're going to need to get tricky. You're going to need to come up with, some misdirection. You're going to have to come up with some different route arrangement, to try and confuse, to punish man, to punish zone. I think it's really going to be a coach's. It's on the coaches to show that they can adjust to what Hamilton was doing.
The only other interesting note offensively, I thought, was the activation of Theron Churchill, who's going to be dressed for this game. And that one, I think, he's listed as the backup to Darius Bladek at right guard. I think I was trying to think, like, if Bladek went down, would it be Giffen or Churchill who go in there? And I actually think it might be Giffen. But I think Churchill is there because there aren't really a lot of other options. Like, what if Nicastro went down? And now you're talking about a real situation. And Churchill, we've seen taking some center snaps. We've seen, some of that, but really not much. There's been very limited play from anyone that's currently on the roster who isn't currently named Nicastro or Blake, who was taking center snaps. But he's the only other guy I think that we've got on this roster that I've seen take any kind of snap. So I think that would be the emergency plan. I know that Bladek has done some center work when he was sort of the swingman in Saskatchewan, but that would be a disaster. So hopefully Nicastro can get through the game because I'm not sure there's another answer there. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, there aren't as many injuries, but there are concerns. So Cresden Butler is out, and I think that is the biggest concern for me. We saw last week, he's been playing free safety. He's been doing a great job at the free safety. He's been there in run support. He's been there in pass coverage, and he's just been a shutdown player. Josh Haggerty came in last week to replace him, and Haggerty is playing way above expectations, just to be clear. And we went over that after, in our post-game podcast. We stressed that Haggerty has done everything that's been asked of him. However, he is still a rookie in the CFL, and he's not quite there yet. And you can't expect him to be. And now he's starting, and Hamilton knows he's starting. And you have to think they're going to start scheming for that. Concerns?
Yeah, deeply concerned. I think that although free safety can be a place that guys get experience, you have to play a very vanilla free safety, which kind of mutes its effectiveness when you have to play really like a deep center field. But look, if that's what they have to do, that's what they have to do. I think you let them play last man back and keep grass between you and the receivers and break on the deep ball, and basically he'll be help for the 40-yard pass. And that's not, it's not the end of the world. It's schematically kind of boring, but I think you can't ask him to do what Butler did. I think you can't ask of a player more than you should. I think that's not on the player. That's just bad coaching. So, I think you give him a limited playbook and try and get by with just taking away the bomb, and you're just not going to have help, on posts.
And my concern is, like you're saying, is the limited playbook. Like, one of the strengths, I think, of this defense so far has been that Coach Young has schemed very well. He's prepared very well for each game. And I'm concerned that he's not going to be able to do that as much. With Haggerty back there playing center field, he's not going to want to disguise as much as Cresden does. He does a great job of hiding the coverage. Hegarty, you're less excited to do that with because you just worry that the timing won't be there or the recognition won't be there. And so yeah, I think you're right. I think you're going to see him playing center field back there, which is fine. And a lot of teams do that across the league. It's not unusual to see a rookie Canadian free safety back there. It happens all the time. But it happens in defenses that are far less creative than what Coach Young has shown us so far. So I'm concerned in that way. I almost wonder if the Argos wouldn't have been better putting Dexter McCoyle back there at free safety and using him heavily in run support and in blitz packaging. He's an experienced guy who can handle that. Why not make that your approach and then play all sorts of, play cover two sky, play a lot of zero and, send crazy heat and really disguise stuff. I know there wasn't a ton of time to rep that, and maybe that's why. Maybe that's my answer.
Yeah, I mean that's the tricky part, right? I mean, because you don't want to put a player, especially a player who's playing really well, in a position where you're not being fair to them. Like if 4 days reps is not going to get it done at the professional level. I don't think. I agree with you. I mean, that was my first thought, but I feel in this quick turnaround that's probably unfair to the player to ask him to do that. So I'd be surprised if they did that. It's a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul too. I think you just deal with the hole that's back there with Butler as best you can, and you don't tinker with the other stuff that's still going okay.
The other injury of concern is Charleston Hughes, who I guess is going to be a game time decision. He's listed as questionable with the knee. This is big, and I know Charleston hasn't put up the sacks that people were hoping. He doesn't have a sack yet, but that's again something that I said off the top. I don't think that's really, he hasn't been asked to do the same things that he's been asked to do in years past. It's a little bit different, but the defensive line has been so banged up that the guys that I would normally feel comfortable about going in for him aren't there right now, and so. I guess, you're going to see Eli Harold there a lot, but, Feeney is going to be starting at the other side. You've got Menser, who's there as a backup, Robbie Smith. Like, there just aren't the big names. And there were so many coming into this season of all the guys that we thought could play defensive end. And we certainly didn't think it was going to be in a situation where we're looking at Feeney starting and Menser and Smith getting a lot of playing time, which I think is going to be the case, especially if Charleston Hughes goes down. But even if he doesn't, I think these guys are all going to be on the field. So hopefully Charleston can be ready to go for the game on Friday, because I think that would be a massive loss.
I think that unfortunately, because of all the injuries that Charleston's had to play, I think we both felt at the beginning that he needed to be probably not a part-time player, but probably a sub. Like where you're rolling in passing situations, and because he's got a lot of miles on that car, and I think he's had to play a lot more. I don't think that they've been able to. When we looked at the camp, we thought, wow, they're going to have basically 7-8 guys that are going to be able to roll through every game. That has kind of dissolved into 3 or 4 guys, holding things at bay, and I think that's a lot to put on him at this point in his career. So. Hopefully he's good to go. He certainly has played well, but I think it's been a tough ask of him.
Let's talk about the strengths of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So after last week, my view on their strengths and weaknesses changed a little bit. Have yours adjusted at all?
Well, I think their offensive line played better than I expected. But I do think in some part that is due to Toronto's defensive line just being decimated. So it is hard to tell where one begins and the other ends. But I did think their offensive line was better than I thought it would be. I thought it would be really quite poor, and it was fine.
I think that their defense still to me looks very good. I was impressed with their defensive play last week. I think that they were in a good situation. It's much easier to play defense when you're up by a couple of scores, and they were up from the beginning of the game pretty much. So that always makes the defense look better. I do think that continues to be a strong point for them. I wouldn't call. There's nothing on their offense that I would really say is a strength of their team, though, because while the offensive line certainly looked better, as you said, than we expected it to, it wasn't. It still wasn't great, and they weren't really tested that much. The receiving core without Banks is fine. I don't think they're anything special though. You look around the league, are they really that much better than without Banks? Are they really that much better than than many other teams? I don't really see that. The running game couldn't really get going too much at all, other than those receiver runs. So to me, the strength again falls on the defense, and I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on them, especially if Toronto can get up early, which I know is something that you've been preaching from week one. Now, what about the team's weaknesses? Is there an area where you feel like Toronto can exploit that they maybe didn't have a chance to last week?
I still think I would like to see more heat. I would like to see Toronto gamble a little more. I understand what the thought behind. Look, let's just line up, keep these guys in front of us, and I think for the most part it worked. They threw for whatever 270. They ran for 80. Those are standard numbers. Those are not big days. So I thought that worked fine. But I think you need to throw a bit more of the kitchen sink into this. That Hamilton is at this point a better team, and so therefore you don't have the luxury of that. I think the defense needs to score. So I would send more heat at that quarterback. I would scheme it up. I'd send more linebackers. I'd send more secondary, more twists, more loops. I think you're going to have to get a little more exotic, and than maybe you would want to. But that's what I would do. I still think the offensive line is Hamilton's weakest unit, and we let them off the hook a little bit last week.
I agree with everything you said there. My only worry, and it's not enough of a worry to cancel, abort the plan here, but my worry is that Dane Evans is pretty savvy in the pocket. He's got really nice feet and a sense of where pressure is coming from. Last week, he escaped the pocket a few times, not so much to run, although I know he did take off on a couple occasions, but he was able to buy himself time. And if the Argos are playing 0 or 1, that time is now going to turn into him tucking and running with every remaining defender now facing the wrong way. So I do worry if they send the kitchen sink and he's able to use his fancy feet and work his way out of there, that there'll be trouble. But I think that's a risk you have to take. I think that that's a risk anytime you send heat, is that they're just going to be, they're going to expose the weakness that's been left there.
I think you have to, because I think the defense is going to need to score. I think that the offense is up against it, and I think the defense is going to have to carry more than 50% of the game. And so from a defensive point of view, you're like, well, like ideally we wouldn't do this, but we need to go get points. Like the defense needs to score a touchdown, and that's going to come from heat. He's too good a quarterback just to throw a bad play. So I think that's where, from a defensive point of view, you do it because the team needs it. From an offensive point of view, they're going to need some help, and so that's where the defense has to do more than just stop Hamilton, but try and turn some points in.
You know what time it is, JB? It's time for OCDC. All right, so as a part of this segment, if you're new listening to the podcast, JB's been a defensive coordinator for a long time. I've been an offensive coordinator for a long time. And so we kind of put on those hats for both teams. So let's start with the visiting Hamilton Tiger Cats. I'll start off as the offensive coordinator for Hamilton. So my plan coming into this week, if I'm the Hamilton Tiger Cats, is to find a way to take advantage of the fact that Toronto's got a rookie free safety. So most of my passing game is going to be centered around exposing that position. And so I'm going to send out a lot of high-lows on the free safety where I'm forcing Josh Haggerty to choose one or the other. So in situations where we've got either cover 1 or cover 3, you've got someone that cuts under his face and then somebody that goes over top. So if you kind of picture, two receivers, the inside two receivers to the trip side, the third receiver to the trip side, the innermost guy runs across his face. So runs, a slant that cuts in front of him. And the second receiver runs a seam. And so now you're putting him in a position where he has to kind of make a judgment call. And it's a really difficult thing for a free safety to do. And a savvy quarterback like Dan Evans is going to try and move him around with his eyes. And that's what I'm going to be working on all week is Hamilton. Those are big plays. If you can get a free safety to commit to one of those two guys and sort of declare it while you still have time to throw that football, you're going to hit some home runs. And we did see it happen on one of those plays last week. I don't think, essentially 2 days of practice and 2 walkthroughs really is all the Argos have run. I'm not sure that's enough time. So everything I'm going to do is going to center around trying to expose the free safety, trying to show him things, tempt him to come in, and then beat him over top, and vice versa. What is your defensive strategy as the DC of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, JB?
Well, I probably wouldn't change very much. I think that you send a gap pressure and you see what DeCastro can do with it. I thought Santos Knox was all over the field. I'm sending him. I'm sending loops at that offensive line. I would send more heat because I think the secondary can play stick 'em with the Argos. And if you have a defense that can play good man, that's a wonderful position to be in as a defensive coordinator. So I would send more heat. I would sit on those 15 yards and in. I would absolutely sit on the outs, especially to the left side of the field. Maybe you get burned on a double move, but I think that you absolutely are sitting on that 15 yards and in, and you're just daring them to throw the ball 40 yards consistently. So I wouldn't do very much different other than maybe send a little more heat because the offensive line is maybe not as good as maybe we thought it was going to be. But I think from a defensive point of view, you challenge Arbuckle's arm until he proves you have to respect it.
Let's switch teams and coach for the Argos now. So as offensive coordinator for the Toronto Argonauts, my plan this week is to build off everything that has been set up to this point in the season. And what I mean by that is that Coach Dinwiddie, with his time in Calgary, and I've talked about this before, but for anyone new listening that hasn't heard this before, Calgary in 2019 did a great job of intentionally showing teams something, giving them a look or even a tendency that they knew was going to be part of the defensive game plan in leading up to that week in film study, where they say, oh, okay, every time they do this, this happens. Every time they do this, this happens. Watch for these slants, watch for these quick outs. And then game time comes and the offense is playing off of those. I feel like the Argos have left a number of seeds down there, and there's a few specifically that I'm looking for this week. We've talked about that, what we call, very affectionately call, the Ricky Collins Jr. screen, that jailbreak screen. Toronto has run that jailbreak screen about a dozen times this year, and they haven't had any plays off of that yet. This might be the week we see something like that. Maybe it's a quick pump fake to Ricky Collins Jr. coming underneath with that same action. But then one of those wideouts, either Curly Gittens Jr. or Dejan Brissett, one of the two guys out there who would normally be blocking on that play, stock blocks and then breaks away on a go route. I'm looking for something like that because they've seen that play. They know that play's coming. You don't even need to run it. You don't even need to run the jailbreak screen first. They've seen it enough. So I want to see something like that early in the game. Pump fake to the jailbreak over the top for a big play, for a home run play. And similarly, Declan Cross last week, I talked about this during the game with you. Declan Cross was getting ignored. They had him lined up as a tight end on several occasions, and Hamilton couldn't have cared less. They weren't even treating him as an eligible receiver. I want to see heavy play action and then a ball down the seam to Declan Cross. And these are the things that I'm talking about. Things that have been set up where we don't go to cross, we don't go to cross, we don't go to cross. Now's the game where we've got to start cashing in some of those checks, some of the, taking advantage of some of the groundwork that has been laid in the opening 4 games of the season. So that's my plan on the offense. JB, what are you doing for the Argos defense this week?
Well, I thought the defense, like we talked about, I thought the defense played well against Hamilton. We gave up a special teams touchdown and a pick six. So you take those 14 points away. I don't. I know it's not very exciting, but I don't really have any, radical statements because I believe in don't fix it if it ain't broke. I thought the defense played well. I think that you're going to have to try and hide that high safety. Um, and as I talked about, like maybe I would send more heat, but I think that we can line up and play with this Hamilton team. I'm um, not concerned about them scoring. I'm not scared about them scoring. I think honestly, I think it's a team that's just a bunch of guys. I think that there's I think that we can keep them in that 14 to 17 point range. The question is going to be, can the offense keep decent field position? Can the offense finish drives? From a defensive point of view, I wouldn't change very much. I don't think Hamilton is going to have time to install very much this week. So normally if you played a team a second time, you'd have more time between the games and you might change some things. So I'm happy with other than a little more quarterback pressure. I think that the defense is good as it is.
One thing, JB. So in our one thing segment, we've been hitting a lot, and yet it hasn't always turned into a win. So last week you wanted 3 sacks. You got your 3 sacks. I wanted a home run ball. We got one to Curly Gittens Jr., and yet the result wasn't there. Maybe this week it'll work out for us. What is the one thing you want to see, JB?
Yeah, I guess I should connect it more to the one thing I see leading to a win. I think what for me, what I want to see is from offense. Is I want to see DJ Foster with 125 all-purpose yards. I want to see him involved in the passing game. I want to see him involved in the running game. I think that he is a weapon, and that we got away from him. And I think he was crucial in the Winnipeg game. I want the team to use Foster more. So I definitely would like to see, catching and running 125 yards from DJ.
I feel like they're a little hesitant with him with regards to his pass protection, which I actually think is good, but the CFL is different from what he's experienced in playing American football, for what he has in the NFL and NCAA.
It's what kept him off the field with the Pats. It's tough. I get that, but still, you got to be able to, I think that you still have to find a way to get him the ball.
And I think they're probably concerned because they did get him, he had 5 receptions last week, I think 7 targets, but only 3 carries. And that's where we really want to see him get some more action, because I think he is a more dangerous back than John White is. But John White is so good in pass protection. And it's also a tell. Like if you've got Foster out there, based on what we know of the Argonauts, you have to assume it's a run to Foster. So they have to find a way to kind of get away from that, where Hamilton can't key on that, but also get him carries. So maybe it's through having those 2-back sets that we've seen them use. I don't know, but there has to be a way to get the ball in his hands. I agree.
Just to tag in, there's one more thing I want to see. I want to see a touchdown punt return.
I'm sorry, was this turned into a 2 things segment, JB?
I do. I want it. I'm tired of waiting for it. Put Trey on.
Well, he's not dressed again this week, but this does tie into my one thing. Chandler Worthy is dressed, and I don't know if he's the guy we're going to see back there for punt returns. I know we might. I know we've seen it in practice. We saw it throughout training camp. I want to see Chandler Worthy get the ball. Not because I think he's a better receiver than anyone else out there, but I think he's faster than everyone else out there. Chandler Worthy is a 4.2, 4.3 guy. He can burn. He's the fastest guy on the team. And I want to see the ball in his hands. I hope it's in punt returns and kick returns. I would love to see him on the field as a receiver. We saw it in training camp where they just couldn't defend him. It was largely go routes, and it was like go routes or slants. That was what they said him on. It was go route slant, go route slant. But he's really tough to defend when those are your 2 options. When he caught those slants and had some space, he was gone. And when he caught a go route, he was gone. And I thought Arbuckle had some really nice timing with him in preseason. I was stunned when he didn't end up making the team. I shouldn't say stunned because I actually didn't have him on my final roster either. But it did surprise me a little bit because he has that element that we've been talking about since the beginning of the year. He can take the ball to the house from anywhere on the field. And so I want to see Chandler Worthy with the ball in his hands, no matter how they do it. Jet sweeps, passes, screens. He can run that Ricky Collins Jr. jailbreak if they want to. And then punt returns, kick returns. Get the ball in Chandler Worthy's hands. Let's see if he can make something happen. Time for our predictions, JB. Well, we missed it last week. How are we doing this week?
Well,
Is this an Argos win or an Argos loss?
I didn't miss it last week.
Didn't you have an Argos win last week?
No, I had a 27-17 Hamilton win.
That doesn't sound right to me. I feel like was it 2 weeks
ago
that you stole my pick?
podcast?
I do. I listen to our podcast. I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna have to check the tape on this.
Oh,
you had a Hamilton win last week. Well, I didn't. I definitely had an Argos win last week. Which is funny because I went against my initial prediction. Initially, preseason, I had last week as a loss, this week as a win. I changed last week. I'm not changing this week. So my prediction for this week is an Argos win. I actually think we're going to see a defensive score, and I think it's going to be a nail-biter at the very end. Maybe Toronto gets up, Hamilton comes fighting back. I have Toronto winning 23-22. Where do you stand on this one, JB?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to have seen Toronto get a little healthier. But I do think Toronto is too good a team to not come up with the win at home. I think that the guys have too much talent and too much pride. I think that they were angry about the penalties. I think they were angry about how the game kind of got out of hand. I think they're going to be dialed in at home. I think that we can play with Hamilton. We just can't have a pick six, cannot give up a special teams touchdown. I think that we get one of those two, and I see the Argos winning 32-27.
Okay. That sounds like an exciting game. I can't wait to see that one happen. That's more exciting than my 23-22. I would love to see the Argos get into the mid-30s or something like that. That'd be great. All right, Argos win. We'll have to see if we're right following this game. That will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos pregame walkthrough. For JB, my name is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.